So we're going to look at adding and subtracting fractions. We will look at questions where the denominators of the fractions are the same. We'll also look at questions where the denominators of the fractions are different. We'll also look at making sure that you give the answer in its simplest form and as a mixed number. You'll need to know how to write an equivalent fraction for any given fraction. You'll need to know how to find the lowest common denominator for two or more fractions. And you need to be able to write mixed numbers as improper fractions and improper fractions as mixed numbers. I have covered these topics in previous videos and the links are in the description below. So let's deal with questions where the denominators are the same. The beauty about this is it is straightforward. Where the denominators are the same, all that we need to do is add the numerators. Now what I'm going to do in the following few questions links to the work that I was doing in the previous video on mixed numbers and writing them as improper fractions. And if you watch that video, you'll see what I mean. Let's have a go at some questions. So if we have 2/5 add 1/5, well, basically we add the 2 and the 1 together and we end up with 3/5. You don't have to put this extra stage in. I'm just doing this to explain what is going on. If we have 3/8 add 1/8, well, 3 add 1 is equal to 4, so we end up with 4/8. But if you look, 4/8 is not a fraction in its simplest form, and normally with questions involving fractions, you will be expected to do that. So 4/8 can actually be simplified to a half by dividing the numerator and the denominator by 4. So the answer to 3/8 add 1/8 is equal to a half. 3/5 add 4/5. The denominators are the same, so we add the numerators. 3 add 4 is equal to 7, so we end up with 7/5. Another thing you might be asked to do is if you end up with an improper fraction, as we have here, you may be required to write it as a mixed number. And we covered mixed numbers in a previous video. So remember, think of 7/5 as 7 divided by 5. 5 goes into 7 once, with a remainder of 2. 1 1/3 add 2 2/3. The first thing to do is to write these mixed numbers as improper fractions. Again, I covered this in a previous video. So writing 1 1/3 as an improper fraction, this is what's going on in my head. I have 1 multiplied by 3 is equal to 3, add the 1 is equal to 4, so we have 4/3. And for 2 2/3, 2 multiplied by 3 is equal to 6, add 2 is equal to 8, so we have 8/3. We now have 4/3 add 8/3 is equal to 12/3. And hopefully you've noticed that 12/3 is the same as 4. 12 divided by 3 is equal to 4. An alternative way could be to add the whole numbers together, so add the 1 and the 2 together, and then add the fractions together. So 1 add 2 is equal to 3, 1/3 add 2/3 is equal to 3/3, so we have 3 add 1 is equal to 4. But the problem with this approach is it can get very problematic when dealing with subtractions, whereas this approach we can easily use with subtractions. So let's have a look at some subtraction questions. 5/7 subtract 2/7. Well, 5 subtract 2 is equal to 3, so we end up with 3/7. 1 1/4 subtract 3/4. So let's write 1 1/4 as an improper fraction. Well, I'm thinking 1 multiplied by 4 is equal to 4, add the 1 and we get 5/4. 5/4 subtract 3/4 is equal to 2/4, and of course 2/4 can simplify to a half. We can push the boundaries a little bit. 2 2/3 add 2/3, subtract 1 1/3. Although there are 3 fractions in this question and there's subtraction and addition, the way we tackle the problem is still the same. Write any mixed numbers as improper fractions. 2 2/3. 2 multiplied by 3 is equal to 6 and 2 is equal to 8. And for 1 1/3, well, that's 1 multiplied by 3 is 3, add 1 is equal to 4. So we have 4/3. So we have 8/3, add 2/3, subtract 4/3. Well, 8 add 2 subtract 4 is equal to 6. So we end up with 6/3. And 6/3 can simplify to 2. 6 divided by 3 is equal to 2. We're now going to look at adding and subtracting fractions where the denominators are different. The work that we do here really does draw upon the work that we did on finding the lowest common denominator, or effectively finding the lowest common multiple of the denominators. So I do recommend that you look at that video if you're not familiar with the work. Now, adding and subtracting fractions where the denominators are different is where many students come unstuck. What we want when doing addition and subtraction is for the denominators to be the same. So where the fractions are different, we need to get those denominators to be the same. So we need to rewrite these fractions so that the denominators are the same. We have 1/4 add 5/8. So the first thing I do when adding or subtracting fractions is to look at the denominators. Are they the same or are they different? If they're the same, we can just add the numerators. But where they are different, as in this case, we have to write these 2 fractions so that they have the same common denominator. And this is where we try and find the lowest common denominator. So we have the denominators 4 and 8. What is the lowest common denominator? Or what is the lowest common multiple of 4 and 8? Hopefully you are aware that 8 is a multiple of 4. 8 is in the 4 times table. And this is great news because it therefore means that the lowest common denominator is 8. So all we have to do is to turn our quarter into 8s. Well, 1/4 is equal to something over 8. Well, 4 multiplied by 2 is equal to 8. If I multiply the denominator by 2, I multiply the numerator by 2. So 1/4 is equal to 2/8. So we now write the question as 2/8 add 5/8, which is equal to 7/8. And that's our answer. 7/8 can't be simplified any further. What if we had 3 2/5 subtract 1 3/10? Well, as with addition, the first thing I want to do is write any mixed numbers as improper fractions. Well, let's do that. 3 2/5. Well, 3 multiplied by 5 is equal to 15. Add 2 is equal to 17. So 3 2/5 can be written as 17/5. And then we have 1 3/10. Well, 1 multiplied by 10 is equal to 10. Add 3 is equal to 13. So we have 17/5 subtract 13/10. We can see that both denominators are different. So we need to rewrite these fractions so that they have the same common denominator, ideally the lowest common denominator. We know that 10 is a multiple of 5 because 10 is in the 5 times table. So actually 10 is going to be the lowest common denominator. So all that we have to do is change 17/5 into tenths. 5 multiplied by 2 is equal to 10. What I do to the denominator, I must also do to the numerator. 17 multiplied by 2 is equal to 34. So we've written 17/5 as 34/10. We now have 34/10 subtract 13/10. And that's going to equal 21/10. Now we could leave the question like that. As 21/10 is in its simplest form, you can't cancel the fraction down any further. However, you may be asked to write the answer as a mixed number. So 21 over 10, well, 21 divided by 10 is equal to 2, because 2 tens are 20, with a remainder of 1. Well, that's what's going on in my head. 21 over 10 as a mixed number is 2 and 1/10. And we can take this further. 3 and 1/12, subtract 3/4, add 1/3. Let's write any mixed numbers as improper fractions. 3 and 1/12, 3/12s are 36, add 1 is 37. So we've rewritten the problem as 37 over 12, subtract 3/4, add 1/3. We can see that the denominators are different, but hopefully you've noticed that the denominator of 12, well, 12 is a multiple of 4 and 3, because 12 is in both the 4 times table and the 3 times table. So our lowest common denominator is actually going to be 12. So all that we need to do is to write 3/4 as a fraction out of 12, which is 9/12, and 1/3 as a fraction out of 12, which is 4/12. So we now have the question 37 over 12, subtract 9 over 12, add 4 over 12. And that comes to 32 over 12. But this fraction can be simplified. If we look at the numerator and the denominator, both 32 and 12 are in the 4 times table. If we divide the numerator and the denominator by 4, well, 32 divided by 4 is equal to 8, and 12 divided by 4 is equal to 3. So we have 8 over 3. And if we wanted to write this as a mixed number, think of 8 divided by 3. Well, 8 divided by 3 is 2, with a remainder of 2. 8 over 3 is the same as 2 and 2/3. Now let's look at this question. 1/3 add 2/5. Are the denominators the same? Well, no. Is one of the denominators a multiple of the other? Again, the answer to that is no. So what's the lowest common denominator? Well, basically, the lowest common denominator is going to be multiplying the two denominators together. 3 multiplied by 5 is 15. 15 is going to be the lowest common denominator. So we need to write 1/3 as something out of 15 and 2/5 as something out of 15. Well, 1/3 is equal to 5 over 15 if we multiply top and bottom by 5, and 2/5 is the same as 6 over 15 if we multiply top and bottom by 3. So we've rewritten the original fractions as 5 over 15 add 6 over 15, which of course the answer is 11 over 15. This fraction can't be simplified any further, so there's the answer. 1/2 add 2/3. We look at the denominators. Are the denominators the same? Well, the answer to that is no. Is one denominator a multiple of the other? Again, the answer to that is no. So the lowest common denominator is going to be the denominators multiplied together. 2 multiplied by 3 is equal to 6. So we write 1/2 as something over 6, and we write 2/3 as something over 6. 1/2 is 3/6, and 2/3 is 4/6. 3/6 add 4/6 is equal to 7/6. We have an improper fraction. You may be required to write that improper fraction as a mixed number. 7/6, I'm thinking 7 divided by 6 is equal to 1, remainder 1. So 7 over 6 can be written as 1 and 1/6. 3/4 subtract 2/5. We look at the denominators. Are they the same? The answer to that is no. Is one denominator a multiple of the other? Again, the answer to that is no. So the lowest common denominator must be 4 multiplied by 5. So we're going to write 3/4 as something over 20. Well, that something is 15. And we're going to write 2/5 as something over 20. And that something must be 8. 3/4 subtract 2/5 is equal to 15 over 20 subtract 8 over 20, which is equal to 7 over 20. And that's the answer. We can't simplify the fraction any further. Let's just do one more question, and I'm going to push the boundaries a little bit further, but the principle is still the same. We have 1 2/3, add 3/5, subtract a half. The first thing we do is write any mixed numbers as improper fractions. 2 2/3, well, 1 multiplied by 3 is equal to 3, add 2 is equal to 5. 5/3, add 3/5, subtract a half. Are the denominators the same? And of course the answer to that is no. Are any of the denominators a multiple of the other denominators? Again, the answer to that is no. So in this case, to find the lowest common denominator, we multiply the 3 and the 5 and the 2 together. Well, 3 times 5 times 2 is equal to 30. So we are going to rewrite these three fractions as something out of 30. 5 over 3 can be written as 50 over 30 by multiplying the numerator and the denominator by 10. 5/3 can be written as 18 over 30 by multiplying the numerator and the denominator by 6. And a half can be written as 15 over 30 by multiplying the numerator and the denominator by 15. 15 over 30, add 18 over 30, subtract 15 over 30. Well, that comes to 53 over 30. So we have an improper fraction as an answer. If we wanted to write this as a mixed number, well, 53 divided by 30 is 1 with a remainder of 23. So 53 over 30 is equal to 1 23/30. I appreciate that the fractions in this question are not easy, but all I want to do was show that the approach and the principles are the same. There are also other similar approaches for tackling such problems, but I really wanted to focus on the principles and draw upon what we've covered in other videos. But the key thing here with addition and subtraction, when you're looking at a question, the first thing you do is, if there are any mixed numbers, write those mixed numbers as improper fractions. The second stage is to then look at the denominators. If they're the same, then it's great. All you have to do is add the numerators. If the denominators are different, then we need to find the lowest common denominator. And when doing that, you need to be aware of whether any of the denominators are multiples of other denominators, as shown in this example here. If you find a common denominator which isn't the lowest common denominator, don't worry, you'll still get the same answer. You might have to do some further simplification. So if we go back to this question here, 1/4 add 5/8. And let's just say you found the common denominator by multiplying the 4 and the 8 together. Well, 4/8 are 32. 1/4 is 8 over 32, and 5/8 is 20 over 32. So we end up with 28 over 32. Well, both 28 and 32 are in the 4 times table. So if I divide the numerator and the denominator by 4, I end up with 7/8. And that's the answer that we had when we found the lowest common denominator. So there's an introduction to adding and subtracting fractions. I hope you found the video helpful, and thank you for watching.